that food
Yeah.
is
This is
a
insane.
human right.
What? How could food not
should
be a
be
human right?
human right. In the United States, that will drop a bomb in honor of furthering human rights is the first country to vote that food is not a human right. And that's because we live in this capitalist society and almost dominated world that says food, healthcare, water, land, housing, anything else you need is a commodity. And it's something to be purchased. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Queer 101, the podcast where we talk about any and everything under the sun, including queer art, queer culture, queer literature, and whatever we want. I am Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh, the historian. And Pep, speaking of queer literature, there's been some great news the last few weeks for the authors from our Queer History Book Club. For those of you in the club, we run through Alstora. We have been picking some of the best queer books of the last year, and they have been recognized. Caro De Robertis, the author of So Many Stars, An Oral History of Trans, Non-Binary, Genderqueer, and Two-Spirit People of Color, was just named a judge for the National Book Awards, which is like the most prestigious awards in the country. Really hoping that, Caro, if you're listening right now, I have a book coming out. Just putting that out there if you want to think about it. And, you know, not to toot my own horn, but it is coming out in May. My bad. That's the name. And also...
Yeah.
Tourmaline, who was a guest just recently for her bio of Marsha P. Johnson, Marsha, is a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for transgender nonfiction, which is so exciting. I'm a previous Lambda Literary finalist myself, and it is just such an honor to see her on that list and to know that that book is getting recognized for the awesome work of genius that it is.
Oh my gosh. Congrats to Tourmaline. Congrats. I actually hosted the Lambda Awards once or twice in the past couple years. Maybe I'll do it again this year. I'll see if I can. And speaking of trans authors and queer authors, I just discovered, I don't know if you knew this, I just discovered the trans and non-binary bookstore in Brooklyn. Do you know that?
The non-binarian, that one?
I don't know. Let me look. I don't know what the name.
I think there's
it's
two
actually
now.
called the trans and... Oh, wow.
Oh, that might be another new one.
This one's been around like a year or so. This bookstore in particular. It's called Queer... Oh, what's it called? It's called Queer Books for All. So I don't know if it's specifically trans or... Let me look. Non-binary... Oh, no, you're right. It's the non-binarian. It's the non-binarian.
The non-binarian, Hive Mind Books, Gloria, which is a Black women-run queer bookstore in Brooklyn. There's a couple others now. Like, we are getting some fabulous bookstores here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah. Well, congrats to Tourmaline and Caro as well. We love both of them. Now, listen, if you haven't listened to our interview with Tourmaline or Caro, or any of our shows for that matter, on the books, then you really should go back now and watch and listen. You can hear our full interviews on the Alstora website. And just make sure you check that out. And Hugh, when you mentioned the nomination, it made me think about Marsha P. and Stonewall and really how queer people have been fighting for our rights. For queer folks are oftentimes on the forefront of all liberation fights, from my perspective, for ages, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up such a great point. It's like there has been so much activism, and I know we've touched on it a couple of times here and there on different episodes, like especially when we talked about Marsha, we talked about Audre Lorde, but the history of queer history is a history of activism. So I was thinking today maybe we could dive into some of that history of activism and what it means and what it looks like today, since you are one of the premier queer activists working on the ground, on the air, in this podcast. So what do you think?
Well, thank you. I think it's great. I don't usually describe myself as an activist. I'm an actor. And so I want people to recognize that I try to bring activism into those spaces, the spaces that doesn't usually exist in. So although I'll go to a march or a rally, I'm generally trying to infiltrate spaces so that they can see our community in more ways than just on the street or just fighting for, because one thing that I noticed that people really do admire someone who fights for themselves, as long as
Oh
they
yeah.
don't have to get involved and help with the fight. And I think that is, you know, that's fine, but like, I'm not going to say to a homeless person, good for you for trying to, for sticking it out. Like if I can help them, I
Hmm.
will. You know what I mean? I'm not going to say to a women's rights activist, you should go, good for you for going and fighting. You're up against a hard fight, but I admire the fact that you're out there by yourself. I don't want to
Yeah.
say that to a women's rights activist. And I don't want the
No.
trans community or the queer community to be in that position either. I know we have allies, but I think we would all be much better off, and our contingent of fighters would be much more powerful if everyone recognizes sort of intersectionality. That, like, today I made a post about immigration rights, and immigrants' rights are also trans issues. Those are also trans rights as well, because there are trans people who are immigrants, for instance. And so it's really important that we recognize that and don't silo everything all the time. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's my sort of response to that.
I mean, I think
But
especially right now,
oh,
as it's Trans Week of Visibility, that is such an important point to make. Like, this struggle
exactly.
is linked to all other struggles.
I found myself uh, between several rocks and several hard places. This past week, I went from DC. I was helping boost the Tax the Rich rally. I also wasn't able to go to everything. Was also helping to boost the Doll Walk, which was, I think, might have been the first ever in New York. Sort of like a trans, it was a march, and an activism sort of march for the trans community was participating here in New York, called the Doll Walk. That happened yesterday. I'm going to be doing some posts, and maybe we'll throw some of the video up on here. We'll see. Anyway,
See it.
but there was a lot going on, and I really was hopeful, even though Bernie Sanders is not really known for being very intersectional with his speeches and things. I was hopeful that some of the queer content creators, because they were interviewing people afterwards, would have been able to get in conference with Bernie Sanders, with some of these people, and actually ask them, you know, get them on record with recognizing that these issues, like the taxing the rich
Hmm.
initiative, is relevant to the queer community, specifically the trans community. When we talk about tax the rich, we talk about not having to have cuts to import in New York, not having cuts to social services, and that's also something that translates to the whole country. And when we think about cuts to social services, a lot of times we think about cuts to things like Medicaid and healthcare, and that affects everyone. But it also
Yeah.
gravely impacts trans folks, because right now, legislatively, our president and states around the country are putting forth legislation to block access to gender-affirming care. And so it's important that people understand that trans people are connected to every single issue that has to do with quality of life, lack of access to resources, especially when it's a
Hmm.
group that's less represented.
Yeah, and I think all the studies we have show that like trans people, especially queer people generally, women are much less likely to earn a decent wage, to have job protections, to have healthcare that comes with employment. I mean, I think that we often get this stereotype in the media about like, the queer community as represented by rich gay white men who own their apartments in the
Hmm.
West Village and then go to circuit parties. But actually, the majority of the queer community is less affluent than the average American. So I think any issue that touches on quality of life, on the working class, on healthcare, on social safety nets, all of these should be seen as queer and trans issues. And I think that's honestly a good place to start our conversation today. What do you think activism is, right? What is queer activism? Is it defined by its intent? Is it only queer activism if you're working on like a specifically queer cause for a specifically queer movement? Can just how you live your life and how you bring your queerness into a space where it's, like you said, maybe not expected or accepted, is that activism? What's your definition?
I don't know that I have a definition. I think activism is really just, I mean, besides advocacy, but it can, you know, I don't know that I have a clear definition. I probably did years ago, but it's, and back in the day, I probably would have said that activism is just like, marching for rights,
Hmm.
things like that. And now I think that activism is probably whatever it needs to be, but it has to connect to, and this is sort of me coming into this. This is not a revelation for the ages, but I think activism needs to, in the current modern context, activism needs to be a working class laborer's mission. You know, it has to be.
Led
I
by.
guess there are political activists who advocate on behalf of um, corporate interests and foreign interests. But, you know, so I guess that's a type of activism. But I think
It's a bad type of activism.
the just activism um, is the one that is connected to the needs of working class folks. What about you?
Well, it's interesting you bring up that point about like what you used to thought versus what you might think now. For a long time when I was younger, I, like you, I think was very much like activism is being out in the streets and yelling. It's protests. It's kind of like creative things like when ACT UP put a giant condom over the house of Senator Jesse Helms because he was holding up HIV and AIDS funding. I saw those things as activism, and I saw what I think at the time I would have called like community organizing is not the same, working together to like get community meetings, to get people to know each other, to, those consciousness raising groups where you'd sit and talk about your issues. I would have said that that was something different. I think as I've gotten older, maybe similar to you, it's my view on what activism is has gotten wider. A lot more things seem like activism to me now and like attempting to make change. I think one of the things I really think about a lot comes to me from Sarah Schulman, who's an incredible queer author and activist who just wrote a book this year or last year called The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity. And she talks a lot about
Mm.
the need for activism to be effective. Not that you always win. We never always win. We don't know what's going to win. We don't know what's going to be effective
Mhm.
necessarily. But that if we don't concentrate on making change, if at the end of the day we don't evaluate what we've done to say, like, are we going somewhere, whether that's making legislative change or it's change in our personal lives or in our relationships with each other, if we're not actually affecting the issue we're organizing around, at some point, does the organizing take the place of making change? I think about that a lot. I see people protesting in so many different ways right now, and it's so exciting. And I think that for me, all I ask is like, do you have goals that I broadly agree with? And do you seem to want to actually make change? Are you committed to getting things done, not just kind of like a symbolic work that maybe you don't even know what the symbol leads to the change? That's for me the big defining moment on activism. And I think when you look historically, like we see in queer life so much of this, so many different kinds of activists. We have the Stonewalls, and before Stonewall, the Black Cat protest, and the protests at Cooper's Donuts out in LA, and the Reminder Days in Philly, where people, protested wearing very nice posters and very nice suits saying that homosexuals should not be denied jobs, in the 1960s, that kind of in the streets activism. And then we have, the entire panoply of activism around the AIDS movement. How many people were in the streets, but also how many people were going back home to their towns and talking to them about like, how do we live? How do we make it possible for someone with AIDS to live in this town where maybe there are no social services and maybe they need to get food and support and medicine from people close to them? It's just, I don't know. I look back on our history and I think there is so much in it to draw from, so many models, and it's people like Tourmaline who give us that bio of Marsha P. Johnson so that we really see both every kind of activism that she did in the streets, in her life, in her art. And that's what really inspires me these days, are looking at these broad activists from our history and asking, like, what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I think that's true. I kind of disagree a little bit. I do think that, like, listen, if somebody's going to plan a march and like call all the people, get the permits, invite everybody to come, figure out what the theme is going to be, paint the signs, and saying, tax the rich, for instance, or like healthcare for the group, they might not be able to be the person that also is up at the same time in the legislative office while the
Oh,
march is
yeah.
taking place. Do you know what I mean? And so I
Yeah.
really do think people have to, maybe it's a domino effect of like people, there's an ignorance or an people are unaware of a lot of these issues or how they work or how they impact certain groups, especially when we're talking about like getting other people on into the solidarity movement. People who are not necessarily a part of the community or directly affected may not know that like marriage equality is on the line or whatever it is. And so we use hopefully art, literature, and these different things obviously as a way to make a point and then hopefully inspire people into it. But I do want to give those activists, because oftentimes the people, it would be wonderful if the richest person in the world was the one on the street fighting for everybody's rights, but that's just not likely, right? The person who is the least affected by these things is not likely to be the person that's going to be the first one out on the front lines. It's usually the people
Absolutely.
who are the most affected. And again, we come back to working class issues. If the person that's most affected by this type of discrimination and this type of things, then they have less access to food, money, housing, whatever, which means they're not able to use all of their human life force to just be constantly going all the time. And they might not even be able to get access to some of the places that people higher up in the chain might be able to get access to. So I do think like the street activism has to inspire the art activism or vice versa. And then the art activism has to inspire the people in the sort of like almost in the bourgeoisie that hopefully like, you know, are like, oh, look at those people on the street. What does that sign say? More medicine? You mean they don't have medicine? Darling, give them the medicine. And like, hopefully it works that way. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, you know.
I mean, I agree with that. I think for me, it's like you just want to know what's the effect you're looking to have. Not every action is going to change a vote. You know, maybe this action is about actually making all the supporters, the people who are on the same page as me, feel inspired and excited. You know, I look at these rallies, the No Kings rallies that were just happening, and that's what I think so much of that is to show how much support there is, how much excitement there is, to get the people who are doing this work in a million other ways to feel really like, oh my God, I am supported. I have people in my community, other people care, or to learn about new issues that maybe I come to the march with one issue and I learn about three others. Sometimes I run into people who think that the march is going to change the vote, you know, and I'm like, no, that's not what this is for. Just know what your activism is doing.
That. Agreed. And I do think that, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures. I mean, I do think that we are, whatever way you look at it, things are more heightened and urgent than in recent times. That's like very, very low bar. You know, we can agree on that, everybody. And so in that regard, like whatever activism, whatever the impact and the intention of activism in years past, it needs to catch up with and sort of reflect the reverent and be reverent to what we're experiencing now, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about ACT UP, you know, and how they had people who were literally smuggling drugs that were not legal in this country across borders to get them into the bodies of people who were dying otherwise. How they were having pools of people sharing their medications in ways that were totally illegal and off license because other people couldn't get access to them. And how much that model feels really important right now when so many people are losing access to gender affirming hormones or other kinds of medical care. You know, these things feel really aggressive maybe, or they feel dangerous because they're breaking the law, but we're in a moment where like that's the level we need to be at, you know. And that's what I think, that's one of the lessons I look back on and I'm like, this is really exciting. But we can go all the way back, way further back, and look at people like Oscar Wilde. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Oscar Wilde, the author, was an Irish guy who wrote and lived in England, was arrested, charged with gross indecency because he was having an affair with a man who was the son of a lord. And he actually went...
Lord.
Indeed, Alfred Douglas. He actually pushed back. He brought the case to trial, saying he had been libeled by this, and that's where he lost. He lost in the libel case, saying that he was being, made fun of in public, and he ended up going to jail for years. And when he came out, he died very quickly thereafter. Oscar Wilde, I mean, if you read any of his work, he is silly, he's witty, he's all about being decorative and sarcastic, and he's not someone who I think would in normal times and places have stepped up and been an activist. He was meant to be a dilettante, an aesthete, a pretty boy, you know, who wrote silly, fun things. But the circumstances of the world that he was in pushed him to a place where he understood, I have this power, I have this notoriety, this celebrity, I can push back in a way that other people cannot. And even though he lost, even though he went to jail for it, he made change through those actions, but it cost him so much. I mean, he almost never wrote really much after he was in jail. And those kind of stories, I think, are ones that I'm returning to over and over again right now. It's like, what power do I have to make change? And how essential in this moment can I be? Where can I best lend my energies?
And I think as we move even past Oscar Wilde further, a little bit further now into the 20th century, we go through sort of ongoing shifts in morality, right? You know, we can see that Oscar Wilde's impacted sort of the next, I guess, generation, we'd say.
Oh, yeah.
As we go through activism, if we look at folks like Harry Hay and the Daughters of Boletus, you know.
Yeah.
And I
They're so important. No, I was just going to say, like, yeah, these are great places we should be looking to.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the organizing, the bringing people together, you know, the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Boletus are some of the first in this country to come together as queer people and just even say, like, what do we want? When do we want it now?
Yeah. And ultimately, like, even I think when it comes to queer activism, again, and I not to belabor this, but like, of course, like on the surface, it's the, you know, freedom to marry, love is love who you love, freedom to dress the way you want, and freedom, but then when we look deeper into that, dressing the way you want, why? So that you're not discriminated against and can't be fired at work or don't get beaten on the street. And so it really is about like very, very basic physical safety and health, access to food and job security and housing. It's like those very limited quality of life things can as we see people be discriminated against for their gender, their sexuality, their gender expression, things like that, then we see the system cutting them off and taking power, using its power, it's the power of the state to limit access to these important services, these rights, human rights. And so that's ultimately what it's about, right?
I think so. And I think that connects so many movements, you know, that kind of like bodily autonomy, the right to control my body, to dress how I want, to get the health care that I want, to have the kind of reproductive freedom that I want. That is for me where like the queer movement meets abolition, meets reproductive choice, meets all kinds of freedoms. Like if you don't control your own body, if you don't have the right to do with your body what you want, if other people get to tell you how you should dress, how you should, when and how you should be pregnant, then at the end of the day, like you're controlled in every aspect of your life. So yeah, autonomy for me.
The piece. That's the big piece is that if you can't control your own body, someone else is controlling your body. You know, I didn't mean to interrupt though. Go ahead.
No, that was it. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And that's for me like a place where like, so long as we all know that, even if you're working over on another issue that's like not the same legislative issue I'm working on, right? But we both understand at the end of the day, this is about making sure that everyone has freedom over their own body, over their own reproductive choices, over their own dress choices. Then we're all moving towards freedom together. You know, we're not going to end up at cross purposes.
I know I mentioned this before, but I really do think, and this is not a part of our book club collection in any way, but I would really beg for people to read Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, just to get as a refresher on how how systems of caste are established, set up, and maintained. And then go back and look at sort of deconstruct the pillars, the tenets of genocide and what it takes, like in terms of genocide scholars, what they say constitutes a genocide. Because I think when we think of genocide, we think everybody was just killed yesterday. They just all killed them all yesterday, which can happen, obviously. But in order to even get to that spot, you have to position the outgroup, the target, in a particular way as a group that has less access to certain rights, can't move around freely, can't identify themselves in the way that they want. Can't have health care and be healthy and take care of themselves, can't work the way that they want, because if they work, they have money and they can leave, they can flee, they can do what they want. But if you want to contain a group, which containment is also one of the pillars of genocide. Containing the group means cutting off their access to being able to move around and have the job they want and having an ID that works. You can't have your ID. Here's your ID. I'm going to give you the ID that says you are the out group. You are contained. You are marked. And then they're stuck. And so that's what's happening when we see the trans community being blocked from access to having accurate passports, when we see in places like Kansas, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that trans people's licenses were suddenly revoked overnight, and then also their birth certificates reverse the same population, the trans people in Kansas. We're seeing Texas starting to say, hey, Kansas sounds like a good idea, we're going to do it too. And so we see all these different places, state by state, because they know that they can't do it federally all in one fell swoop, state by state, working this way up to the Supreme Court. And right now we're waiting on Supreme Court decisions, which we've talked about before, to trans folks being able to play in sports, trans access to gender-affirming care, trans passports. And so there's so many things that we're waiting to see. And of course, once the Supreme Court rules, that will be sort of the lay of the land, the law of the land, rather. And that is cutting off the trans people or a certain sector of the population to key things that they need in order to have that freedom that we all talk about in our country. And so that's why the Lemkin Institute says that I think their third red flag warning that America, the United States of America, is on its way to a genocide, building up a genocide of transgender people in this country because of the laws and the over 600 now in 2026 laws and bills, anti-trans bills, policies that they are trying to implement into law. Some of them have passed, some of them haven't, against trans people. And they are all doing things like limiting access to bathrooms, identification, sports teams, job security,
healthcare,
fair
job
housing,
security,
healthcare, all those things,
Yeah, and they're sort of the court that is right now, like this week, the last week, deciding on what should happen with birthright citizenship. Another case where they are trying to take people's documents, trying to revoke their ability to access services, to even live in this country. And so you see how these things are all just so connected, which is why, again, I mean, going back to what we talked about at the top of the show, like our activism has to be connected and has to recognize each other. Speaking of which, I know we both have to get to some TDOV events this week, so we should close it down today. But there is so much more to talk about, y'all. At home, we're gonna continue this next week. We're gonna keep talking about activism because we have only scratched the tiniest bit of the surface here.
It is true. In the meantime, make sure you are following both of us on our social media. And also go over to some of the organizations that I've been posting about this week, particularly Gender Liberation, and also Black Trans, Liberation. Those are two great organizations that are working both at the national and at the local level to help out the trans community, to support and uplift the trans community, and also educate people on social media about what the community is dealing with. And you can find some really great information there. I posted about it personally on my social media, so please go check them out. And do something for Trans Day of Visibility, which is today, but it doesn't have to end today because we can see that all these things are continuing on. So even if you're hearing this or watching this past April 1st, still do something in honor of Trans Day of Visibility.
Yeah, it's not the only day. It's like you're not just allowed to do activism on Trans Day of Disability. So whenever you hear this, please do something. I want to give a shout out to Free to Be Youth. They're a project here in New York City that provides legal services to queer youth, mostly homeless, street-involved queer youth of color, almost all trans youth. And they're working now with youth around the country, getting resources from New York City into other states where they're needed. They do great work and they do on-the-ground service provision. So please check them out, Free to Be Youth. And let us know in the comments where you're giving, where you're doing your activism, what kind of places you're excited to join with, what you're doing for Trans Day of Visibility. And of course, also like us, subscribe, do all the things.
All that jazz. Yeah. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by us, Peppermint and Hugh, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban.
If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps others discover the show.
You can stay connected and join the conversation by following us at Peppermint 24/7 or write to us at questions@queer101podcast.com.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our history is your history. Stay proud, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Queer 101.